Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
Hey, the streaming should be back up. Once again, my fault. I didn't upgrade the Microsoft Windows 10 when I was supposed to, and got a little bit of glitch in the programming there.
What else have you been up to, Brad? Come on.
John.
Isn't Windows 10 upgrade at the top of your list?
It was number 3. Number 2. Okay, first off, let's go back to this McDonald thing for a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Why is it that the government just can't tell us the truth? You know, because...
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, Brad. I can't spin that anyway.
I'm not an expert. I don't work for the federal government. I'm not a geologist or a radiologist or any of this kind of stuff. Why is it that I know that when I see a press release that says, oh, they're going to close McDonald Boulevard to rebuild the bridge, when there is no bridge there? And I'm thinking to myself, this is all a smokescreen for them tearing the road up so they can get the dirt out from underneath it, which is all highly polluted. And then, who was it that finally came out and said this?
It was, it was a representative of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There's a specific group that's working on it. It's from the formerly utilized sites remedial action program called FUSRAP.
That's like the operation out in St. Charles was WISRAP. One of these days, I'm going to go in what they call. They have a term for this. You haven't been out there. Do you know where I'm talking about? South of Francis Howell High School in 94 down toward Hoffmanville.
Yeah, I haven't been there. You've talked about it several times on the show, though.
Okay, there's this big old mound that supposedly is this concrete dish, if you can imagine this, that it's filled with some kind of with special liners so it never leaks out, and all the gunk that was in that area, all the radioactive stuff and all the poisonous stuff supposedly in there. And they built this fancy schmancy building in front of it. And I'm not exaggerating when I say fancy schmancy. Brad, my father was a civil engineer, and I've done some construction work myself. Eyeball calculator, I said this is a $10 to $15 million building. Now hold it in mind. The federal government built it, so it's probably a $40 to $50 million building. So, and it's like what they call the Weldon Springs Commemorative Center. And supposedly you go in there and you look at all this crazy stuff. But one of these days I'm going to go in there. Because I'm thinking to myself, you go by the parking lot, there's never anybody there. Okay. The whole thing with this going on for 80 plus years is the government knew what was going on, but they don't tell us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. But you could also think, Brad, what happened? Have you seen any of the news lately about the 9th District Court of Appeals in San Francisco, which is generally a very liberal court, and the lawsuit about Moderna and the lawsuit about these vaccine mandates? Have you seen this?
I have not.
Okay, so real briefly, as it comes to the government, this is just in the category of the government not telling us the truth. The 9th District Court of Appeals, there was a lawsuit about teachers having to take the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. And the point of the lawsuit and what the 9th District Court of Appeals says, as I understand it, is that the COVID vaccine is not a vaccine. A vaccine, by definition, prevents illness. If you take a polio vaccine, it keeps you from getting polio. If you take a COVID-19, quote, vaccine, unquote, it doesn't keep you from getting COVID-19. It could lessen the symptoms if you get COVID-19. So a very liberal court based in San Francisco, and as an aside, the 9th District Court of Appeals was the bane of Monsanto when I worked there. I wrote many statements reacting to the 9th District Court of Appeals. A progressive court, Brad, has said, yeah, but actually the COVID vaccine isn't really a vaccine. So if it's not a vaccine, then a district or a government body can't require you to take a vaccine that's not really a vaccine. Do you see what I'm saying?
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, I wonder if they brought Dr. Fauci in, and he's like,
he would be an expert witness on that, Brad.
You look back on the last 4 years, and you look back on this whole crazy kabuki that we were involved in, with the vaccine and the whole bit. And I don't know. I mean, there's still things. There's a timeline in my life in the last 20 years, okay? And actually the last, 25 at this point in time. 9/11 was the first blip in that timeline where things drastically change in our society, okay? Then we have the 2008, 2009, 2010 real estate crisis, the whole meltdown.
Yep.
And I still can't believe you haven't seen the movie The Big Short.
No, I might just avoid seeing it on general principle just to annoy you, Brad.
Okay. And then obviously we had back in early 2000 with the whole crazy thing going on with COVID and remember Shelley used to get so mad at me because there was a 60 Minutes episode. I believe it ran in January or February of 2020 where they had the 60 guy, and there's an interesting part of this is the 60 Minutes guy who interviewed him used the word schmutz, which was sort of interesting. Yeah. How many times?
What's schmutz?
What's that?
What's a schmutz?
Don't you know what schmutz is?
No, I've never heard of that.
Schmutz is, I think, somewhat of a Yiddish term. I think the guy that interviewed him was a Jewish dude. And schmutz is something like, if you have something that's like you have a blob of something on the floor, it's schmutz. There's some schmutz on the floor.
Wow.
Here, let me look at this. Let me see. Here. Well, here. Well, I'll look this up and give you the exact definition. And in two separate occasions, Fauci comes out and says, masks, I used to have it on one of my what we call our quick keys here in the studio. I don't have it in this studio because we did the BS show out of the other studio. I used to play those all the time, and Shelley gets so mad, I can't believe you keep playing that. I go, well, this is a perfect example of the guy that everybody is paying attention to. He's done a 180. In January or February of March, he says, masks, you don't need a mask. You don't need a mask. And then he got to the point where you need 3 masks, and it's to the point where, once again, he's the guy that's citing science all the time. Okay, Dr. Fauci, cite me the science for no mask and cite me the science for mask. And and the crazy part of it is he couldn't do either one of them.
Yeah.
Because
now, what critics would say is that, well, Brad, science changes over time, and the government was just doing what they thought was in our best interest to protect us, Brad. Hey, 2 weeks to stop the spread, Brad. Why didn't you just segregate yourself for 2 weeks, Brad? You could have stopped the spread.
SCHMUTZ, North American Informal, dirt or similar unpleasant substance. These handy wipes, here we use it in a sentence, these handy wipes are always close by for wiping schmutz off my shoes or cleaning up coffee spills. I double check you don't have schmutz on your teeth. Okay.
Boy, I tell you what, Governor Parson went to the state fair and he got covered in schmutz.
Right. See what good things this show provides is Brad.
Absolutely. And did you say that derivation of that is Yiddish?
Well, see, I have friends.
It sounds like a Yiddish word. Here's where I push back. I have a feeling after 4 years at WashU, if there was a Yiddish term, I would have heard it. You catch my drift, Brad?
I had a lot of Jewish friends. My best friend for a long time was Jeff Andrew, the chief engineer at the old KSLQ. He's Jewish. I used to go to temple with him and stuff like that, or synagogue, whatever you call it. I mean, I used to wear the yarmulke and stuff like that. I mean, I very much enjoyed my time with, and I don't want to sound like, well, I know black people, but see, once again,
my best friends are Yiddish.
But once again, it's one of these things. It's like, I don't understand this whole hate of the Jewish people. I heard a guy interviewed the other day, a Jewish guy he says, we are the most productive, what did he say? We're the most productive, motivated, educated, literate people in the world. And I'm going like, I agree, you are. Now, maybe that's why people hate them. Right. Maybe that's why people hate them. Because
I think so. There's a lot of envy involved in that, for sure.
I don't understand the whole thing. Okay, so here.
I got you off track. I'm sorry, Brad.
See, I think it was Yiddish because I may be wrong. Okay, you got me off track again. John, you know what? You do this on purpose, don't you?
I do. Well, I brought up Tracy in the first segment just for fun because I thought as a way to get your juices flowing, get that testosterone pumping. You need it this week, Brad.
I've said publicly and privately, I love people that have a passion for what they do. And after 51 years of being in this crazy, ridiculous radio business, I still have a passion for what I do. And
yes.
I still have a passion for my industry, and I still have a passion for the fact that drives me nuts to see what's happened to our country, to see what's happened to our government on so many levels, to see my the passion for education, that the education people, what do they want? They want more money, more money, more money. And in, what did you say, quarter of the school districts in the state of Missouri now, they're only working 4 days a week.
25%.
You want more money, work 6 days a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't get me going, okay? Okay, having said that, okay, here's another perfect example of explain this to me. Okay, you ready, John?
I'd love to. I'm ready. I can explain it, Brad. I can explain anything.
Here's a story from Tuesday. Now, once again, even with President Biden last week said, we're shutting down the border, which they're not. The border has effectively not changed. All you need to do is the guy who is the authority on this is Bill Melugin. You know who Bill Melugin is?
I don't know that. No.
Bill Melugin is one of the reporters who's based on the border. He works for Fox. He's the guy always on the border taking the shots of all these single men streaming across the border, and he's the guy that goes up and talks to them. Where are you from? Turkey. Istanbul. I'm from, they're never from Mexico. They're never even from...
It used to be Constantinople, by the way. It used to be Constantinople. Why? They liked it better that way. Go ahead.
They're never from Mexico. They're never these poor migrants who are trying to bring their family with them. They're like dudes who look like they just got out of training, for an elite, army squad or something like that, as what they refer to them as military-aged men. And remember, we just had a thing. There was a story I read the other day. There was a guy that got blown up, not physically blown up, but blown up by the press because he claimed there were terrorists crossing the border. And in a New York Times fact check, you know who this guy is, Redburn or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
I saw this on Twitter.
Okay,
yeah.
and a New York Times fact check, the New York Times fact checker says there's no evidence that any terrorists have ever crossed the border. Well, just the other day they say there's 8 dudes that are all terrorists who are right here in the United States, and the reason they arrested them was because they're talking about bombing stuff. They intercepted their phone calls, they tapped their phone calls and stuff like that. How spooky is this stuff? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay, here's what I'm talking about. So, on one border, we've got, let the people in. They just want a good life. Here's the story, June 11th. U.S. Coast Guard intercepts hundreds of migrants heading for American shores. The Coast Guard intercepted hundreds of migrants in overcrowded boats headed toward the United States over the weekend. In total, 305 people fleeing the Bahamas and Haiti were busted for unlawful maritime migration attempts during Operation Vigilant Sentry and rescued from unsafe vessels and returned to their countries. The major operation last week came on the heels of President Biden's controversial and hotly debated immigration policy enacted June 4th that bars asylum for migrants who illegally entered the U.S. by land or sea. Okay, so why is it that we are so good at keeping them out from coming by sea, but by land, hey, come on in. There's the border. Yeah, I know Biden said he's cracking down, but he doesn't really mean that. Just come on in. Explain that to me, John.
Well, it's almost as if Democrats want as much immigration as possible, and they want the situation to get worse and worse until they can take more steps in September and October and fix the immigration problem.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. That would be like saying, let's say Creve Corps decided that they didn't want to have any speeders on 270 anymore, so they set up 20 police officers on 270, and if you were 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, you got a ticket. But yet they didn't care about Olive Boulevard.
Exactly. It's very selective there. Governor Parsons said the other day, I didn't hear the speech, but I believe I believe Scott Fawn quoted it in the conversation with Mary Elizabeth Coleman. Governor Parsons said that there's an estimated 77,000 illegal immigrants in the state of Missouri.
And we're not even one of the popular states.
Yeah, absolutely. And at first, Brad, that number seemed super high. And I was like, okay, that can't possibly be accurate. Like there's some exaggeration going on there. But when you think about it, what the population of St. Charles is roughly about 70,000, right? I looked that up recently.
City of St. Charles,
isn't that
yes.
ballpark?
Yes.
So I mean, I could believe there's a population the size of the city of St. Charles of illegals in the state of Missouri. Does that number seem right to you?
Well, but think about this. You've got some cities that have 70,000 illegals just in one city. In New York, it's what, 150, 200,000?
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
You know, and here
but even in Missouri here, at first my point is, at first that number seemed almost exaggerated, but I think that could be true. And do you tell me, and here, that's right. It was during the Mary Elizabeth Coleman conversation, because Mary Elizabeth Coleman's point was, are you telling me out of 77,000 illegal immigrants, not one of them will attempt to vote in either August or November? Of course they will.
Well, you know, it's funny. I've been doing a lot of deep dive and stuff in the last couple of weeks. And, you know, once again, I look at the situation with former President Trump. First off, I wish he'd just shut up about the 2000 election. My point being, there are discrepancies in every single election. I don't care what anybody says. We had a classic example of an election that was redone in the city of St. Louis. What's the guy's name? His last name Franks. He was one of the Ferguson protesters. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, Bruce Franks.
Right.
I haven't thought of him in a while. Yeah, Superman. Remember, that was his gimmick. He was Superman.
Right. And remember, he ran for state rep and lost, and then they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the election was rigged by the lady he ran against, who was her sort of henchman, I guess you could say. She was a very rich, she owned a lot of real estate, a lot of apartment complexes, and they literally proved that she sent her goons, whatever they were, out to people's homes and say, hey, did you get a one of those absentee ballots? Yeah, well, you know what? Just give to us and we'll take care of it. So they proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And am I kidding about this? They redid the election. Remember that?
And Bruce Franks won fair and square.
And he won. So, you know, but once again, the idea being is that it's just to the point where there's some things you just want to, let it go. You just want to say, okay. And now what's interesting is I do believe that I've heard numerous experts saying that Trump is getting better at staying on message and not going, oh, those guys, they stole the election in 2000, and once again, and to the point where I think how he looks incredibly stupid now, where you look at the fact that with Rudy Giuliani, there's talk about a guy who fallen from grace. Here was a mayor, a Republican mayor, who cleaned up New York City, turned that city around, became a beloved political figure by obviously the Republicans and Democrats as well, not all of them, but a bunch of them, because he cleaned up the city, turned it around, and then he goes off on this crazy, weird, deal with Trump, and it's just like...
He hasn't helped him. I know we're up against break, but I think with Giuliani, he hasn't helped himself. And at the same time, the media has gleefully demonized him and exacerbated any slight slip in credibility. They've obviously piled on him. But I agree with you that he certainly hasn't helped himself.
Well, here's the problem. And what people don't realize is the FDA, this is going to happen probably by the end of this year, the beginning of next year. The FDA is going to come out and ban male hair dye because of the fact that they say that they know it causes brain problems, and that's Rudy's problem. Remember the one press conference he had where the hair dye was running down his face.
Oh, it was miserable. Yeah, he looked like a really bad independent wrestler in the 80s. Or he looked like somebody you would have seen at a high school gym in 93.
Or me, the way I looked this morning, right? One of those three.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?